You are about to see many one-of-a-kind artifacts. Feel free to get up close to this amazing history and take lots of pictures. But please do not touch the vehicles or cross any barriers. Thank you for visiting the American Heritage Museum.
Every Memorial Day, 37,000 American flags are placed in Boston Common to commemorate those citizens of Massachusetts who have laid down their lives in the defense of freedom. The American Heritage Museum seeks to honor these local fallen heroes, as well as the 1.3 million Americans who have made the ultimate sacrifice. Hello, I'm Rob Collins, Executive Director of the Collins Foundation's American Heritage Museum. I'm proud to welcome you and to showcase the amazing collection built by Jacques Littlefield. We're grateful to all of our donors who've made this museum possible. The theme of the American Heritage Museum is found in the opening line of the Declaration of Independence. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary. Necessary to do what? To fight for freedom in order to enjoy the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Here you'll explore America's conflicts, beginning with the Revolutionary War to today. You'll discover and interact with our inheritance through the history, the national effort developing new technologies of warfare, and the human impact of America's fight to preserve the freedom we all hold dear. One of our direct ancestors in the Collins family was John Cowdery of Boston. He was a Revolutionary War citizen soldier who fought at Bunker Hill in the Battle of White Plains. As you tour the museum, take a moment to reflect on your own family backgrounds, your relatives past and present who have answered the call, ready and able to defend our freedoms. So to them, and to all veterans, men and women that are here today, we say thank you for your service.
Stories of men and women of extraordinary courage. Many of these citizen soldiers have taken up arms using the weapons and technology so carefully restored and preserved here at the American Heritage Museum. Their stories begin right here in Massachusetts, not 15 miles from where you are seated. Sturdy Bostonians, men like Sam Adams and John Hancock, would no longer stand for the taxing of tea, stamps, sugar, and other goods by British rulers to pay for their growing empire. On April 19th, 1775, a war of rebellion would break out in Concord, Massachusetts, and a patriot militia would stun redcoats, driving them back to Boston. Within a year, this American Revolution would give birth to the Declaration of Independence. It is a document that gives purpose to this and all future armed conflicts involving Americans, a document dedicated to fighting for freedom when, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary. These patriots would shock the world by turning back assaults of British troops at the Battle of Bunker Hill until their powder ran out. But the truth was, they were outmanned and outgunned from the start by a superior, highly trained British force. Even the stalwart commander, George Washington, was defeated in battle after battle. Yet gradually, through his cunning and fortitude, and with help from allies, the tide of the war would turn. But most importantly, it was the ragtag patriot citizen soldiers rallying to the cause of freedom that would achieve an astonishing victory over Britain's military, the mightiest in the world. The weapons that these dedicated men and women used to defend their freedom played an ever-increasing role in the outcomes of battles fought. Concord's patriot militiamen carried a fowling piece as compared to the more deadly Brown Bess musket, standard issue for a British redcoat. But cannons forged in Pennsylvania and fired by the citizen soldiers like Boston's Henry Burbeck of the 3rd Continental Artillery will help to shift the war in America's favor at the Battle of Monmouth.
Trench mates look pretty grim.
You'd look pretty grim too if you'd been at the front as long as these guys have been here.
Well, we could all use a good meal soon. I'm getting tired of eating canned rations.
Head down, soldier, if you want to keep it. And these snaggers would love another notch.
Yeah, and I got a bone to pick with the supply sergeant. My boots are too small, my feet are killing me.
That won't be the only thing killing you if you don't move. Now let's go, you two, let's go.
Fighting the Great War. Not great in wonder, but great in its terrible toll. It's like we are fighting all of Europe. Squads of destruction and left tens of millions dead. France has lost an entire generation of young men due to the war. Tonight and beyond. And God bless you. One and all.
Let's drive the Germans out of zombie hell.
You men, take cover! Get back from those walls! Corporal, send up the scouts to cut the barbed wire to the morning attack. Yes, sir! The rest of you cover up. You men,
I'll celebrate the moves. Get used to it, boys. It's every night.
all right, men. Take your weapons. Make ready. Let's go!
The fighting was relentless. The stalemate would only be broken by sending our boys into a fusilated lead that, for many of them, meant certain death. Even now, I hear our ambulances, the lorries, the horse-drawn carts, all bringing a new wave of casualties to us. Some will arrive with horrific wounds, mangled limbs, others choking on poison gas. Still others will arrive concussed and shattered in mind as well as body. The new and so-called efficient weapons of war, tanks, machine guns, and poison gas, and aeroplanes that now bring death from overhead, all will change the face of the battlefield forever. Some estimates will show over 40 million military and civilian casualties in this great war. 200,000 will die in the trenches. Many of you will return home from this war. But 100 miles north of San Miel, in the verdant fields of the Meuse, France, almost 31,000 of you will find your final resting place. Solemn evidence to future generations of what is necessary to defend freedom.
This First World War has shaped the outlook on history. The role of technology and the human factor in war for many who fought it. stalwart Churchill, as well as de Gaulle of France, Italy's Mussolini, and Russia's Stalin. Each will become a known leader, but none will have a greater impact on the world to come than a young, embittered Austrian corporal who survived years of shelling and gas attacks in the trenches, Adolf Hitler. War clouds will soon, once again, be on the horizon.
This was the first mass-produced American tank, but it never made it to World War I. The war ended before we could get them over there. There was a similar one that was being built by Peugeot and Renault in France, but General Pershing was involved in the design of this.
Okay.
These are the years between the end of World War I and the beginning of World War II. This Panzer I tank over here.
Please enter War Clouds now.
We acquired it a couple of years ago from a gentleman or the estate of a gentleman who passed away in Las Vegas. He had it all in pieces, and we acquired all the pieces and brought it back here in our workshop on the other side of the museum. Literally spent 2 years rebuilding it. And literally a month ago, they were able to drive it from the backside all the way up here, and it runs. There's only 3 vehicles in the entire museum that you're going to see that don't operate. And everything's authentic except for that Mercedes-Benz.
With the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, the war to end all wars is over. Square miles of territory and paid millions in reparations. Many Germans are upset about their treatment by the Allied powers, and support grows for a far-right political party known as the National Socialist German Workers' Party. This Nazi party is led by a charismatic Austrian veteran of the Great War named Adolf Hitler. In 1933, Hitler is able to take power in Germany through cunning political tricks and brute force. He quickly and secretly begins military rearmament as a first step toward complete domination of Europe. In 1936, Nazi Germany forms an alliance with Italy's fascist dictator, Benito Mussolini. The Nazis also begin to put in place plans for what eventually becomes known as the final solution, the horrific annihilation of Europe's Jewish population. Half a world away, the Empire of Japan is in a full-scale war with China. After the Japanese Army's brutal killings of millions in Nanking in 1937, Japan is viewed by many nations as a rogue state. War clouds are gathering across the world. Within a year of seizing power, Hitler's factories begin mass production of new machines that Germany claims are simply tractors. Among the so-called tractors is the Panzer I. In reality, the Panzer I is a light tank, crewed by a driver and a commander gunner. Hitler has learned the harsh lessons of trench warfare. He imagines that this use of technology will spearhead a new mobile fighting force. Rearmament spurs industrial production in Germany. Employment rebounds to an all-time high. Life for many Germans is good again, but not for all. Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, November 9th, 1938. The windows of Jewish-owned shops, buildings, and synagogues are smashed by the SA paramilitary and German civilians. Soon, entire Jewish families, including children, are rounded up, deported, or worse, sent to concentration camps. European nations take no measures to stop Hitler. Unchecked, Germany builds its military might on land, sea, and in the air. Many in Germany adore their Führer. During speeches, Hitler whips his audience into a frenzy. His twisted callings will affect a whole generation of young Germans. He plays to huge crowds, parading in his open car. The Mercedes-Benz G4 is a 6-wheeled heavy personnel car, a vehicle ominous in its size and importance. Mercedes-Benz builds more than 50 of these imposing vehicles for German high command. In 1938, the confident Nazis annex Austria. Britain's Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain flies to Munich and obtains what he feels is a guarantee of no further aggression by Germany. He returns to England proclaiming it is peace for our time. But Hitler's promises are hollow. The Nazis invade Czechoslovakia in 1939. Less than a year later, Germany launches a surprise invasion of Poland, with the Soviet army attacking from the east. Stuka dive bombers hammer the city of Warsaw, and German panzer tank units cause chaos among the Polish army. The failed strategy of appeasement is now over. England and France finally declare war on Germany. Still, America remains on the sidelines. Most U.S. citizens are against any involvement in another war in Europe. Hitler's forces march on. Germany invades the Low Countries, Luxembourg, Belgium, and the Netherlands. His next target is France. Hitler's strategy of blitzkrieg, lightning war, overwhelms French forces. A British expeditionary force joins the fight. But the Brits quickly learn that their Vickers Mark VI light tanks are no match for the German panzer mobility and firepower. After the Battle of France, 300,000 British troops are successfully evacuated through the Channel port at Dunkirk. Hitler next launches air attacks on Britain. If he can destroy the nation's air defenses, he may then launch an invasion. Thus begins the Battle of Britain. Technology changes the war with a newly developed radar network, which allows Britain's air defenses to spot German planes approaching and get Royal Air Force fighter planes into the air before they can be caught on the ground. RAF pilots and their Spitfires and Hurricanes battled the German Luftwaffe in a war of attrition. When Hitler turns his attention to bombing raids on key British cities, known as the Blitz, much of London is engulfed in flames. But Britain still refuses to surrender. U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt realizes that America cannot remain isolated any longer. He signs into law the Lend-Lease Bill, pledging America's commitment to arm and support the Allies in Europe. Roosevelt hails American industry as the arsenal of democracy. America can no longer hide behind a shield of neutrality. Roosevelt knows this. Hitler knows this. And thousands of miles across the Pacific, so did military commanders bent on a new order in Asia, the Imperial Japanese Empire. Roosevelt seizes Japanese assets and orders a crushing oil embargo. The Japanese Navy wants to seize oil resources in Asia and the South Pacific by knocking out any major resistance from Western forces, especially America's Pacific Fleet. Then, on the morning of December 7th, 1941,
we interrupt this program to bring you a special bulletin.
now an ill-prepared America will be thrust into a second world war.
For years, the Collings Foundation has operated something called the Wings of Freedom Tour. Bob Collings, the original founder of the Collings Foundation, had a fascination with World War II airplanes, and he literally started buying old airplanes that were not operational and rebuilt them to an operational status. He had B-24, B-25, B-17, B-51. And they're all kept in Florida. Every spring they would fly from Florida across the southern tier of the United States up the west coast, get to the northwest, and come back through the Midwest, and come up to New England by the end of the summer, early spring, early fall, and then come back down the East Coast to get back to Florida by the time winter set in. And when you get to California, there was a small airport in California that had a collection of tanks near this airbase or this airport. And he contacted the Collings Foundation and said, "Is it okay if I bring a couple of tanks down to show off with your airplanes?" And they said, "Sure." So Jacques Littlefield brought them down and showed them off, and a friendship between the Littlefield family and the Collings family started. Well, sadly, Mr. Littlefield contracted cancer and died in 2009. His family had no interest in keeping any of his collection that was kept virtually in a warehouse. And Rob Collings Jr. Contacted the Littlefield Foundation to see whether or not he could buy 3 or 4 tanks. Well, he goes out to California and they inform him that there were no tanks for sale. But since the Littlefield family had no interest in keeping up the collection, they were willing to give the entire collection to the Collings family. The problem was that how do you get such a vast collection from the West Coast to the East Coast? And a big expense, number one, but then what do you do with it as far as the display is concerned? So literally they auctioned off roughly about half of the collection in California, and those funds were used to pay for this museum and to literally transport the remainder of the collection across country on flatbed trailer trucks. And they got them here in 2018 and rolled them into the museum. There are only 3 vehicles that you've seen so far, and you can see in front of you, that do not operate. Behind that Panther tank, you see a German personnel carrier that's kind of lit in an orange type of lighting. That does not operate, doesn't have an engine in it, but it also happens to be the star of a movie. It was in the 1966 movie The Dirty Dozen with Lee Marvin. He drove it at the end of the movie and tried to get his Allied troops out of the way of the exploding German castle that they had just bombed. You'll see down in front of you a Higgins boat that was literally active in D-Day in Normandy. The museum is set up so that as you come down, walk around this way and go across the mezzanine, come down those stairs. When you get to the bottom of those stairs, to the right where you see that camouflage tank, that's the beginning of the Africa campaign. That's where the British first engaged the Germans, and it's the first place that the Americans engaged the Germans.
North Africa.
Yes, and it goes from North Africa to under the mezzanine over here to the Italian campaign. Then there's a workshop where there's a tank that's in repair, make believe, a real workshop, you can't go in. Underneath us is the Eastern Front. In the summer of 1941, Hitler decided that he didn't like the Russians anymore, and he literally turned around and decided he was going to attack the Russians in addition to taking on the British and the Americans. So this talks about the Eastern Front below us. And we work into the clash of steel between that Panther tank there and this Russian tank here. There's a video that will be shown when you get down there. But as we go around this way, we go through the D-Day, and then past D-Day we get into the Battle of the Bulge, and then crossing the Rhine. Back there is a Messerschmitt 109 German airplane, a Russian tank back there. You can see the cannon sticking up in the air. That's an 88mm cannon from the German army. And as you go under the mezzanine, you'll see that the dedication to the Holocaust. And then on the other side, you'll see the Pacific War, and the Marines and so forth over there. There's an airplane way over in the corner that is a P-40 that is actually the same model plane that was used by the Flying Tigers in China before the World War broke out, but it literally is one of only 4 surviving P-40s that were at Pearl Harbor when the Japanese attacked. And then you'll get into the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the Middle East over here. And then there's an M1A1 tank that's way over here in the corner. And that's pretty much it.
Wow.
One of the keys to being able to gear up for the war was that we literally, to use a common today term, we pivoted industry from building cars to building tanks, and Ford factories were pivoted into making building B-24 bombers. Singer sewing machine shifted their attention from building sewing machines to building Norton bomb sights for bombers. This PT boat was produced in 60 hours, literally, and they used to be a yacht manufacturer. It's really interesting. In 1945, the Raytheon Corporation was in the middle of working on radar, and one of the engineers found that the candy bar that he had in his pocket would melt every time that he was working on something. And lo and behold, he discovered microwave and how to make a microwave oven. So it's really kind of interesting what came out of the war.
Wow.
That uniform you see in the glass case over there just belonged to an Army Air Corps flyer that was in the Doolittle raid that attacked Tokyo in the spring of 1942. He was captured by the Japanese in China. He was held prisoner, and after the war, he became a missionary and actually served as a missionary in Japan.
Wow.
So if you head down this way,
Yeah, but this would have been October
one of my
2019.
associates will pick you up down there.
Okay, thank you so much for your time.
Warhawk, that's new. Yep.
Out here in the North African section with vehicles most notably associated with the campaign. We have here a Matilda II, which is a British light tank that was first used during the Battle of France, but made its big points during the North African campaign solely because of obviously the terrain and the openness that was suited for armored warfare. We have a QRS 2-pounder, which was one of the main anti-tank guns that the British deployed throughout most of the early parts of the Second World War, until it was eventually replaced by more heavier and more reliable tanks such as the British 6-pounder, which we have here on display also. Here we have probably one of the most interesting and probably most notable armored vehicles associated with the North African campaign, the M3 Lee. Anyone who takes a notice of this will immediately realize that it shares a lot of similarities to the M4 Sherman, and that's solely because it was meant to be a stopgap between the M2 Medium, which was a pre-war American tank, and the M4 Sherman. It takes a lot of the same components of the two, such as the chassis of what will become eventually the M4 Sherman, and as well as the gun mounts from the M2 Medium as well. It has a 75mm gun in the hull with a sponson mount straight out of World War I, and of course a 37mm gun up in the turret with a coaxial 30 caliber machine gun for the tank commander. It was particularly favorited by the Brits, though complaints definitely varied because obviously it has a lot of unnecessary material like hull mounted gun, the turrets, some people, but of course these were very much used in the desert, and it was a stopgap between the Sherman and, well, this. We have a German BMW motorcycle with sidecar. I'm pretty sure anyone from Indiana Jones will probably be familiar with this. These were used by German military police and reconnaissance units during the North African campaign and all across throughout all their military campaigns in Europe. We have an MG-34 machine gun here, one of the main light machine guns used by the Wehrmacht, the German armed forces in World War II. On most German armored vehicles during the conflict, as well as many here, the many of the vehicles prefer to use the 34 over the MG42, solely because it could be used much more effectively when changing the barrel. You cannot do that with many of the hull-mounted machine guns. We have a German SDKF-10 half-track. These were exclusively used in the North African campaign, though there are examples on the Eastern Front. We have one of the main anti-tank weapons used by the Nazis during the war, the PaK-40 75mm anti-tank gun. These were mounted in many armored vehicles and would prove to be a very formidable anti-tank weapon against most Allied vehicles during the war. Then, of course, we have the SDKF-222 armored car, which was used primarily by reconnaissance units during the Second World War. It's outfitted, of course, now for service in the North African campaign. It has an MG34 mounted on the turret with a 20mm anti-aircraft gun. Quite effective weapon. Quite effective weapon against both infantry and light armored vehicles. So would not want to be in the receiving end of that. Of course, then we start to shift over here to Italy, the Italian campaign. I should also mention the Polensky raid here in early 1944, I believe. Actually, no, correction. August 1943. I gotta remind myself that.